Hi, Filmatics. Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we have a very special guest, John Edwards. John has written numerous episodes of Tom and Jerry, one of my favorite cartoons ever. And he's also written books for Walt Disney's legacy properties, such as OMG, Frozen, The Incredibles, and Wreck-It Ralph. And currently, John Edwards is the head of story for San Francisco based animation company Luminous Blue Limited. Let's welcome John to the show. Hi, John.
Hi, Marilyn. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a blast listening to the shows, other podcasts. I'm a new film addict, but I'm having time listening to the guests that you've had on. I feel quite honored because you've had quite a number of very accomplished people. I'll do my best to hold up my end of the bargain and be an interesting guest on your show today.
I think so. Thank you for that. And we're just so lucky to have amazing guests on the show like yourself and the previous guests and future guests. Just they're so generous, telling their stories, how they made it in Hollywood and how they started. And I just wanted to say, oh my gosh, Tom and Jerry, that's amazing. You're going to have so many people listening to your show because you've done legacy properties from Disney. But I have to ask you, our most famous question is,
Absolutely.
What is one of your favorite movies growing up as a kid that you just fell in love with?
Oh, without question. I mean, and there were a lot, but without question, I think it has to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was just the right age for Raiders. My dad took me one summer when it came out for my birthday, and I was like 10. So I was just right in the market demographic for that movie. But it just blew my mind. I sat there with my eyes bugging out, my jaw wide open the entire time. It was unlike anything I'd really seen at that point. The adventure, and of course, Harrison Ford, I was already a fan from Star Wars and Blade Runner. But it was such a well-told action story, and I think that's what really stuck with me. I was old enough to appreciate how amazing the script was, as well as how much fun it was to watch. And then I come to realize that it was based on old movie serials and radio show serials. And so it actually not only inspired my love of movies and writing and entertainment industry, but it also fostered an entire new appreciation for me of old film, of old radio shows. And that's one of the things I like to listen to the most nowadays are old radio shows like The Shadow, Gunsmoke, that are very much in the same vein as Raiders. Just, they came much, much earlier, before you had directors like Spielberg and you had the technology to tell those stories the way we tell them now. So.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be it. Raiders, without question.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. What a fun action adventure. And Harrison Ford is just so charming, his charisma on screen. I mean, like, even as a girl, I was like, that's so cool.
Women wanted to be with him. Men wanted to be him. I mean, it was the perfect. I mean, how can you? He's Han Solo, man. How could you go wrong? I can't imagine anybody. It's one of those roles where you just can't imagine anybody doing that role besides him. It was just meant to be, right?
Yeah, the dream team, Spielberg and Harrison Ford, and the amazing script, the writer of that, and the production value, just so fun, action and fun and adventure. When you want to go to the movies, that's what I want to see. And
exactly, it's like escapism, but it's also, there's more to it than that. But at the end of the day, it's just a great, fun film to watch, and you can't go wrong with it, right?
Yeah, and I have a little secret to tell you. Can I share it with you?
Okay. Just you, me, and millions of our closest friends listening right
and our
now.
Listeners. I actually did a little comedy spoof called Independent Jones. So I did my own version. Yep. Yeah. I did it. Independent Jones is on his quest to find the Holy Bowl with age superheroes, Wondering Woman, Cobweb Man, Liquid Man. just oh my gosh, yeah. So I did that, like one of my very first shorts. So and so speaking of old radio shows like The Shadow, I'm gonna watch that. I love those kind of things. And you even said X-1, but you know what's really
X-1's an old science fiction, kind of like a Twilight Zone, but it's definitely very clearly in the science fiction realm, not so much the fantastical like Twilight Zone obviously got into sometimes. But just great kind of pulpy science fiction. But then I think of all of them, I mean, The Shadow is great, but Gunsmoke actually was one of the ones that surprised me the most. The old radio shows of Gunsmoke are, I think, minute for minute, as good as any drama that we still have today. I mean, it was amazing to me this was done so long ago, because I figured, that the stories would be a little more quaint and, a little more conservative sensibilities or whatever. But no, I mean, this was hard-hitting, gritty, very real, very relevant drama. And William Conrad as Matt Dillon is just, to this day, he's Matt Dillon to me. His voice, he had just one of those perfect, commanding voices that, you knew him as soon as he did any role on the radio. You're like, oh my God, that's William Conrad.
Yeah.
It's been a treat to discover those.
And right now, what's really popular is old-fashioned radio shows on podcasts as well.
Yeah. Well, that's how I listen to it's actually not a podcast per se, but it's a computer streaming station, I guess you'd call it. AM 1710, to give the guy a little plug there. He has tens of thousands of hours of shows. And what's particularly great about that one is that he plays them on like this date in history. So for example, today, if I were to be listening, I'm hearing shows that were played exactly 30, 40, 50 years ago on this date, and they include the commercials in between. So it's really like a time capsule as well.
Wow.
Of course, most of the commercials are all about Chesterfield, which is, we're going to hear. We're going to spend a lot of time on today, but
Yeah, and a lot of chewing tobacco and cigarettes. But speaking of old-fashioned radio shows, I just finished one on Thrilling Stories podcast called Identity Theft, and it was so fun, and I can't wait to do another one. But they're amazing. If you can find if you find a writer to do an old-fashioned film noir, and I was just very lucky with that one. It's Thrilling Stories podcast with Identity Theft. It was an all-star cast and Emmy-winning composer Leonard Wolf. So we just finished that one. So as you know, I'm pretty busy with podcasts.
Well, I was just getting ready to say you are a Renaissance gal. You're into like everything.
Well,
this is great.
In lockdown, you got to be productive, because otherwise I think you would just focus on the depressing news, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just like, and a lot of people were depressed. So basically that sprung out of people were depressed, not working, and to just encourage people to do something and just feel better working. And everyone was very happy to work.
I think that's true. I've stopped watching the news, other than just headlines, just so I can know, just in broad brush, what's going on in the world. But it's like, I can't deal with the news anymore. And I actually deleted my Facebook account. I said, I got to focus on things that are more uplifting, and not even just uplifting, but just satisfying. So I went back to work. Buried myself into my work, and also I've been renovating my house too. So if I get to a point where I just can't tap another key on the keyboard, then I'll take a break and I'll just go hang some drywall or whatever. I'm converting my garage into a more appropriate work office.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And speaking of, so in your work office, I'm pretty sure there's a big movie screen, but I want to ask you, what is one of your favorite Criterion movies that perhaps inspired you on your journey to be filmmaker, producer, writer?
Sure. Actually, I'm not sure if this is technically a Criterion movie, but I was thinking about this. Is Casablanca, which, that's like saying, it's like for a writer saying, my favorite author is Shakespeare, but it's true though.
Mm-hmm.
For me, Casablanca was actually a film that I was familiar with, but really, really got to know well, beyond just enjoying it as an audience member. I've studied it in film school, and it occurs to me that Casablanca, in my opinion, is one of the most perfect films ever made. Anything you want to study about film and storytelling, Casablanca has an example of it. If you want to learn about how to write a good romance, well, there you go. If you want to write, the cool anti-hero, well, that's there too. How do you do, believable humor and characters that stick with you? That's there too. And as far as a redemption story goes, when Rick decides to join the fight again at the end, I mean, it's just you're all but standing up and cheering. So that would be one of mine. And so my feeling is, as I'm watching it, I'm like, that's what I want to write. I want to write something as good as Casablanca. Hopefully, every time I put pen to paper, that's what I'm aspiring to, is something that no matter how you look at it, it's just a solid film that moves you every single time. When Rick has the flashback about, reading the letter in the rain, and as the drops hit the ink and it runs, it's just, it just crushes me every single time. It never gets threadbare. Nothing about that film ever gets boring or pat. And so to be able to write something that moves people that way and that lasts over time, I think that's where I draw my inspiration from, is Casablanca, definitely. Yeah, Michael Kirk was a great film.
And speaking of, you were describing that beautiful scene in the rain where he's reading the letter. That is a beautiful scene that is haunting and just foretelling, and just so emotional and captivating. So as a writer, or can you share us one of your favorite scenes and your favorite directors from a movie that you love?
Yeah, actually, you know what? I was thinking about that too. And of course, I could pick anything from Casablanca. And that scene with the rain, I think is one of my favorites, because nothing is really said. And with film, you're telling a story in pictures, not with words. And the interplay of the image of the rain actually on words, literally dissolving words, and in Bogey's expression, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to belabor the point. You don't have to have an actor or a character talking about how bad they feel and kind of spelling out for the audience what's happening. It's like we see it, and because we see it, we feel it. And so for me, that's actually just to pick out one example. That's a perfect example of how to tell a story in film, right? And it doesn't take long to have the impact hit you. And again, like I said, you don't have to have people telling you what's going on, which is kind of defeating the purpose anyway. Yeah. So that would be. I'm going to go back to Casablanca on that one.
Sure. And and so can you share one of your favorite directors that you love?
Yeah, actually, Ridley Scott's one of my favorites. A more modern director. Alien, Blade Runner is next to Casablanca. Depending on my mood and the day, it's either Casablanca or Blade Runner that are my favorite movies. And so Ridley Scott for that reason. The sort of gritty, dystopic view that he had, the way he sort of brings that, he creates those worlds and makes those very engaging backdrops in which to tell very human stories. Again, you don't think necessarily of Alien as a human story, or even Blade Runner necessarily, but at their heart, they really are. And I think that's why they last, as opposed to just being one more special effects laden kind of movie. It doesn't work if there's no story. And I think Ridley does a great job of bringing visual spectacle with a very intimate story together.
Yeah, and our audience is saying a lot of our audience is like new TikTok audience, Snapchat, and YouTubers, and they're like, thanks. Your guests have suggested the best movies ever, and Blade Runner is a big hit with our audience. They're like, that is the best movie ever.
It is. It was fantastic. I think I was only like 11 when it came out, and it actually was the first R-rated movie that my dad let me see. And I think because Harrison Ford was in it, right? So he was thinking, oh, how bad could it be? Han Solo's in it. And it's science fiction, because I've always been a huge science fiction fan, and I absolutely loved it. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. And fun fact, several years later, not that I would have any idea that this would happen, but when I first got to LA, I actually got to sit down with Bud Yorkin, who was one of the co-producers of the film. And of course, a lot of people will know Bud Yorkin from working with Norman Lear on shows like All in the Family and Good Times and stuff like that.
Wow, that's incredible.
I got to sit in his office for 45 minutes and just talk with him about Blade Runner, and he was kind of dishing on things. And I just couldn't, I'm just in awe of it. But
that's a cool story. And you probably see the posters and everything. And yeah, that moment when you're in somebody's office on the lot and you're just like, everything comes full fruition. You're like, I'm here. What a great feeling that is.
Oh, yeah. And it's, the whole time you're sitting there, you're doing your best to have a conversation with, but of course, in our heads, we're all like, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing the whole fanboy geeking out. Oh, please don't let me say something stupid. Oh, all this conversations going on inside your head. Like, just don't let me look like an idiot.
Yeah, the inside. That's like, yeah, so cute. And I have to ask.
If I did, he was at least very great. He never said anything if I did, so he was very great.
What a great host and what a great producer. And I have.
He was a very gracious man, and an incredibly talented producer, but also a really just very genuine person, at least in my experience with him.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I love to hear those great stories, and so does our audience. And I have to ask you something fun, because on our show we love fun stuff. So,
sure.
So can you do a line from Mask of Zorro?
You're reading my notes, aren't you? It was my favorite. I was anticipating the favorite line question, and I've been thinking about it for a couple of days. And I thought, it's the one that sticks with me, because Mask of Zorro it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's such a fun film, but it's also so well crafted that there are these great moments of humor in this what is essentially a drama. And so when Diego is in the cave with the original Zorro, played so well by Anthony Hopkins. And so Anthony Hopkins, and of course, Antonio Banderas' character is this sort of wastrel who's been taken under his wing, who's essentially going to be the new Zorro. And Anthony Hopkins, De La Vega is like, I don't know if I can do anything with this guy. So he hands them the sword, and of course Banderas basically brandishes it and does all sorts of bravado and all this sort of thing, showing off. And Hopkins just looks at him very stone-faced and says, "Do you know how to use that thing?" And Banderas just looks at him completely honestly, completely innocently, and says, "Yes, the pointy end goes into the other man." So that kills me every single time. And then, of course, Hopkins comes back with, "This is going to take a lot of work." It's just, it says, again, it's funny. It's just a funny line. Because, how else do you use a sword, right? You don't plug it in. It's pretty much got one very self-evident use and, operation. But it just sets up the chemistry of their relationship for the entire movie,
Yeah.
The long-suffering mentor and the sort of, buffoonish, student who then, eventually grows into his own and becomes a great action film. But, yeah, I've always loved that. The pointy end goes into the other man.
Oh my God, you do that so well. We're gonna. I have to.
The lines that stick with me. You tend to remember them. In whole cloth with the accents, and you see the scene in your head every time you do it. But
I hope our audience heard that, because I don't know if you guys heard it as clear as I did, but he actually did it so brilliantly, saying
I did. I really did. Trust me. If you didn't hear it, I really did.
The pointy end goes into the other man.
Yeah, it's like anytime someone, whenever there's something that's just so obvious, right? Like a Captain Obvious moment, right? That's like the perfect quote to use, but the pointy end goes into the other.
Yeah. And speaking of the Mask of Zorro, like, I don't know if you know, but I actually worked for David Foster, the other David Foster at Paramount Studios. And he was very gracious, because when I was driving him around on the golf cart, I admitted it, like when I hit the brake, he almost flew out of the golf cart. So I was like, whoosh, whiplash.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but
he'll remember you forever, no.
Yeah, right? And so I have to let people know, like, John, your name is John Edwards, and everyone, you are the other John Edwards. And what do people always ask you?
I'm one of the many. Actually, they always ask me if I can talk to the dead, which I always have to remind them that that's John Edward, no S, And so I finally it got to be so tiring that I finally just said, no, I don't. I've stopped explaining.
Oh, come on. You got to say yes.
A lot of people are probably rolling over in their graves, but that's as close as I get to talking to the dead.
Oh, you got to say yes sometimes. But
I don't even know what happened to that guy. Whatever happened to him?
Oh, he's probably still around. Yeah, he's got those best-selling books. That
probably. You don't see him like you used to. Yeah.
He'll probably have a new TV show coming out, because they reboot almost every single thing on the entire world. And right,
true,
so
right?
I mean, yeah, and so speaking.
Well, they should reboot it with me now, because I've already got the name. Right?
Yeah, and speaking of, so you do something interesting. You write and make cartoon characters sound really great and alive. And I can't wait to talk to you about your career path, because you actually. Can you let people know where you are from? I bet you they can guess it the way with your accent, but where are you from?
I am from Lexington, Kentucky.
Yes.
I'm son of the bluegrass, which I probably at one point had much more of an accent than I do. I actually tried to lose it and have more of a neutral voice, although occasionally people will come up to me and some people can spot it more easily than others. But I was born and raised in Lexington and lived there. Well, I went to the University of Kentucky, got both of my degrees there. So I was there for about 25 years, born and raised. And then the first time I ever lived more than 10 miles probably from the hospital where I was born was when I went to graduate school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Incredible. Wow. I wonder if you know my friends, the Oxleys. They're like, they own horses out there. I mean, I'm just, side note. I don't know.
I don't.
Okay, yeah, but it's so
right.
So we're gonna talk about your journey, this bluegrass boy, if we're allowed to say these adjectives anymore, because my generation's different. So forgive me with my adjectives and speaking, because kindness is a two-way street. So how your story, how you came from Kentucky and moved to Los Angeles and are doing spectacular cartoons, and especially one of my favorite, Tom and Jerry, because as a kid, I have to tell you a funny story. I had the little Tom and Jerry puppet doll, and it was a blue corduroy cat with the white stomach, and he had a little string that you pulled with the little plastic mouse, and it would make noises, and it'd be my puppet. So I had that doll growing up as a kid, so it brings back lots and lots of memories. And
oh, that's fun. When you said it had a drawstring, I'm like, how's that work? The cats and the mouse don't talk. Unless it's just like screaming and howling, because they do that.
Yeah, the little plastic mouse, Jerry, right? You would pull it down, and it had a little box in the puppet's stomach, a little square box where like the sound would come out, and you put your hand in and like make a little puppet. So now
that's cool.
Yeah, so it's one of my first puppets that I had, and then the voiceover broke, so I think that's where I started maybe my stories, because it had no more voice, so I had to make up my own stories and characters and voices.
Oh, see, now that's a good story right there, actually.
Yeah.
Out of necessity comes good story.
And that living away from children, and we were always 20 miles away from kids, so there was no one to play with. I'd be out in the woods with no one, so you'd have to make up friends and characters. So
see, I was an only child, so yeah, and again, I was at just that right age. Star Wars had come out, and Raiders of the Lost Ark and everything, so I had all the action figures and things. And even though I had a TV in my room, which I made way too much use of, I still spent a lot of my time just making up stories, replaying Star Wars episodes, Star Trek, whatever, and making up new stories. I would have toys like all over the house because I tell these wide epic stories. And so the living room was one planet and the bedroom was whatever. And my parents would have people coming over and they're like, will you clean up all of the stuff? And my parents they were really cool because they knew the names for things. So it was really funny to hear my mom or my dad come through and say, son, pick up your TIE fighter and the Viper needs to go too. And take here's your troop transport and take that, It's just, words you just don't expect your parents to say.
Oh.
And with the ease with which they could say them. So
you sound like you have cool parents. Did they know which planet? Did they know the living room was planet X and your bedroom was planet, I don't know, ZXZY?
No, I mean they recognized the toys, but whatever story I was weaving, they had no idea. And there was a certain amount of okay, whatever, just do whatever you're doing. And oh my gosh,
did you have
he is?
Yeah, did you have a train from one room to the other, like a choo-choo train?
No, I did have a train, but it was downstairs and it just went in one big oval. It wasn't real super sophisticated. I was never really into trains a whole lot, so I didn't build like the whole model in the town and stuff. Although I love those things. There are back before COVID, there are a number of places up here, model train societies or whatever, who will set up stuff at the different museums periodically. On their fast. I mean, I'm thrilled to see those things and take the kids to them. But God, thanks to COVID, it's been so long since we've done anything like that.
Oh yeah.
Soon, someday again, soon again, we will get to all.
Yeah, I love train sets too, and the ones like an oval or circle. And the Beechwood Canyon, I lived on Beechwood Canyon, the Hollywood Hills for a long time. The Beechwood store, they would always have in the window, they would have, oh my gosh, they would have like the train going all around this little magical city. There were slopes, they were skiing, they were shopping, they were ice skating, there was snow.
Yeah, right. It takes forever just to take it all in, which is pretty fantastic. I have a friend up here actually. Her son is big into train, or was, and they actually had an elevated train set in his room, and it like hung from his ceiling up over the room, and it was an oval that went around the room, but from the top, so you'd look up at the train as it was going around, and I always thought that was like the coolest thing ever.
That sounds cool.
An elevated train in the room.
Yeah. And speaking of, we're gonna go to part 2. So we'll wrap it up with the train. I just saw in the paper that Rod Stewart needs like 5 shipping containers to fly his train set, Winter Wonderland Village to London. Like 5 shipping containers to fly his train set from Los Angeles to London. Yeah, that's a big train set. Maybe he'll come on the show and talk about his train set or something.
Can you imagine that? He shows up at the airport and they're like, do you have anything to check? I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yes, bring it in. I don't even know how that works. But,
I guess when you're like super superstar, you can buy the biggest train set in the entire world and ship it around the world.
I guess, right? And use the biggest train in the world to get it to places.
Yeah.
Or, man, no, I didn't even know he was a train guy, actually. But who knew?
Well, so we're going to end part 1 with John Edwards and come back for part 2 because we're going to learn all about Tom and Jerry, how this Kentucky boy has found huge success working in animation with some of the most iconic Walt Disney properties such as Frozen, The Incredibles, Wreck-It Ralph, and more about his being head of story for Luminous Blue Limited up in San Francisco. So come on back. Thank you for listening. And we'll be back with part 2 in just a second. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you soon.